March 6, 1944. Northern Burma. Near the Hukong Valley. Dawn comes without ceremony in the Burmese jungle. No bugle. No sunrise over open ground. Just a slow thinning of darkness beneath a ceiling of leaves, and the constant wet sound of insects moving where you cannot see them. General Mutaguchi Renya, commander of the Imperial Japanese Army's 15th Army, stands under a canvas awning stretched between teak trees. Rainwater drips from the edges in steady, maddening taps. His boots are caked with red mud. The map table before him is already warping from humidity. Somewhere in the distance, a machine gun fires a short burst, not close enough to matter. Not close enough to explain the unease settling in his chest. For weeks, Japanese patrols have reported nothing. No British columns. No Indian infantry. No armor. No supply convoys. Just empty trails, abandoned villages, jungle swallowing everything. That is the problem. Mutaguchi had planned this campaign with absolute confidence. Operation Yugo, the bold thrust into India that would break British power in the east. The enemy, he believed, was tied to roads, depots, railheads. Cut the roads, starve the columns, and the British would wither in the jungle as they always had. That had been true in 1942. It is no longer true in 1944. A staff officer steps forward and bows. His uniform is stained darker at the armpits and collar. He has not slept. Reports from the 53rd Division, sir, he says. No enemy contact along the Kameng Road, but supply dumps to the rear have gone silent. Mutaguchi looks up slowly. Gone silent, he repeats. Yes, sir, no artillery fire, no trucks, no wireless traffic. Silence in this jungle is never neutral. The general straightens, adjusting the sword at his hip. Around him the jungle breathes, cicadas shrieking, leaves creaking, unseen birds scattering. He gestures toward the map. Where is the enemy supposed to be? He asks. The officer points to a thick green mass, marked only with contour lines and river names. Here, sir, advancing from Lido, that is where we expected them. Mutaguchi studies the map. The British and Indian forces should have been funneling forward along narrow corridors, fighting through Japanese blocking positions, bleeding for every mile. Instead, his army is fighting ghosts. Far overhead, the sound arrives late, a deep, distant drone. Not aircraft engines in formation. Not bombers. Transport planes. Mutaguchi steps out from under the awning and tilts his head back. You can barely see them through the canopy, but the sound is unmistakable. Dakotas. C-47s. Dozens of them. They are not heading toward Japanese-held airfields. They are flying past them. Crates begin to fall from the sky, parachutes blooming white against the green. Somewhere deep in the jungle, behind Japanese lines, Allied troops are receiving food, ammunition, radios, even artillery. The realization comes slowly, and then all at once. The British have not fought through the jungle. They have flown over it. Weeks earlier, columns of Wingate's Chindits had vanished into the forest, cutting rails and telegraph lines, building hidden airstrips with machetes and bare hands. Now, under General William Slim, the Allies are doing something the Japanese doctrine says is impossible, sustaining entire formations without roads. Mutaguchi's divisions, dug in along supply routes they believe are vital, are suddenly irrelevant. They are not defending choke points. They are guarding nothing. A runner arrives, breathless, mud-streaked. Sir, the 18th Division reports Allied troops sighted near Indaw, advancing from the west. Mutaguchi stiffens. That is impossible, he says sharply. There are no roads there. The runner hesitates. They are not using roads, sir. Mutaguchi feels it then, the cold behind the ribs. The sensation a commander gets not when he is defeated in battle, but when the battle has passed him by entirely. His army has not been crushed. It has been bypassed. In the jungle, units that do not move starve. Supply lines rot. Men weaken, then die, without ever firing their rifles. Mutaguchi looks again at the map. For the first time, it no longer shows a front line. It shows an island of Japanese forces surrounded by green, and an enemy who no longer needs to touch them to win. The jungle hums. The aircraft fade into the distance. And somewhere behind his army, the war is moving on without him. March 10, 1944. Near Kameng, northern Burma. By mid-morning, the jungle heat has turned the air into something you breathe rather than feel. Sweat darkens uniforms within minutes. Leeches cling to calves. The Japanese soldiers of the 53rd Division sit in shallow trenches overlooking a trail that no one uses anymore. They were told this trail mattered. Private Tanaka Hiroshi, 19 years old, grips his Arisaka rifle and stares into the green tunnel ahead. For 3 days, no British patrols have appeared. No probing fire. No artillery preparation. Just the distant thunder of aircraft engines that never come close enough to shoot at. The jungle smells wrong. Too quiet. Behind him, a sergeant mutters, "They should have come by now." Tanaka says nothing. He has stopped counting days by rations and started counting them by weakness. The rice sacks arrived late last week. Today, there is only thin gruel and tea. At division headquarters, the situation map has grown messy. Red pins marking Japanese units still hold firm ground. Blue pins, the enemy, have begun appearing in places they should not exist. Colonel Sato Masanabu, operations officer, runs his finger along a newly reported sighting. "This would place British forces here," he says carefully, "which means they have crossed the Magong River without bridges." General Kawabe Masakazu, overall commander in Burma, listens in silence. He has seen this before, not here, but in reports from New Guinea and the Solomons. The enemy does not attack strongpoints anymore. He flows around them. "Their supplies?" Kawabe asks. "By air," Sato replies. "Daily drops, some strips are taking light aircraft, artillery included." A pause. "That should not be possible," another officer says. Kawabe turns to him. "It is possible," he replies, "because it is happening." Across the jungle, Allied columns move like smoke. Indian 5th Division, British 2nd Division, and Chinese units under General Stilwell advance through terrain the Japanese once believed impassable. Engineers cut hidden airstrips. Radios chatter constantly. When men fall, they are evacuated by aircraft instead of left behind. The Japanese notice the change in small, terrifying ways. At a forward supply dump, crates are found untouched, but the jungle beyond shows fresh boot prints heading west, not east. A platoon sent to investigate vanishes. Days later, a single survivor crawls back, skeletal and shaking. "They were already behind us," he whispers. "They did not fight, they just watched." By March 12th, General Mutaguchi receives confirmation he cannot ignore. A radio intercept places British headquarters units operating west of his main line of advance. Not raiding parties. Headquarters. Signals trucks. Field hospitals. That means one thing. The Allies believe the Japanese blocking forces no longer matter. Mutaguchi slams his fist on the table. "They cannot ignore us," he snaps. "We still have 30,000 men." But numbers do not move food through jungle. Orders go out to counterattack, to reassert control, to reestablish contact, to force the enemy to fight. The orders arrive too late. Japanese battalions step off their positions and move into jungle that no longer contains a front. Trails dissolve. Guides get lost. Units march for days without water sources marked on outdated maps. Above them, Allied aircraft circle lazily, immune to small arms fire, dropping supplies with clinical precision. At Shajuzup, a Japanese regiment finally encounters British troops, not in a prepared defense, but while unloading supply crates. The British do not hold ground. They delay, disengage, and fade back into the trees. The Japanese pursue and walk straight past another Allied column moving the opposite direction. There is no decisive battle, just exhaustion. Men begin collapsing from dysentery and malaria. Ammunition is hoarded because resupply no longer comes. Artillery sits silent because shells are too precious to waste on unseen enemies. By March 15th, entire Japanese units are technically intact, flags flying, officers present, yet functionally dead. They are surrounded by jungle they cannot eat, cannot fly over, cannot escape. Muraguchi receives his final confirmation that evening. A message from 18th Division. Enemy advancing toward Mikina. We are not in contact. Recommend withdrawal or redeployment. Withdrawal to where? The roads they rely on are cut, not by attack but by irrelevance. The enemy has already passed them. Muraguchi steps outside again as night falls. The jungle is alive with sound now. Somewhere, engines drone closer this time. Parachutes open like pale flowers beyond the trees. He realizes the truth that Japanese doctrine has not prepared him for. You do not lose this war by being defeated. You lose it by being left behind. March 18, 1944. West of Magong, northern Burma. The order finally arrives just before dawn, carried by a radio operator whose hands shake as he copies it down. All units are to advance west and regain contact with the enemy. It is not a retreat. Japanese doctrine does not allow retreats. It is called a maneuver, a correction, a necessary adjustment to bring the enemy back into reach. On paper, the movement looks simple. In the jungle, it is a death sentence. Colonel Nakajima Koji, commanding a regiment of the 53rd Division, folds the message carefully and slips it into his map case. He does not read it aloud to his officers. They already know what it means. They must abandon their prepared positions, the trenches, the dugouts, the carefully camouflaged supply pits, and walk into terrain no one has reconnoitered. Rations, one captain asks quietly. Nakajima hesitates. 3 days, he answers. Stretch to 5. The column moves out as the sun burns the mist away. Files of soldiers disappear into green corridors, barely wider than their shoulders. There is no road, just a memory of one. Within hours, the jungle begins to take its toll. Boots rot. Packs tear on vines. Men slip down muddy ravines and vanish without a sound. Leeches cover exposed skin in black, pulsing lines. Water is everywhere, and almost none of it safe to drink. By noon they hear aircraft again. Not bombers. Supply planes. They pass overhead in steady intervals, engines confident, unhurried. Parachutes bloom far ahead of the column, unmistakably west. The enemy is not retreating. They are being fed in the direction the Japanese are desperately trying to reach. By the second day, men are collapsing. Malaria returns with a vengeance. Dysentery spreads. The medics have no quinine left. Stretchers slow the column, but leaving the sick behind is unthinkable, and yet quietly it begins to happen. Nakajima watches a private sit down against a tree and close his eyes. "Get up," the sergeant says. The private does not respond. They leave him with his rifle and one canteen. The jungle swallows him within minutes. Elsewhere, General Muraguchi attempts to regain control through radio orders that cannot change geography. He demands speed. Speed requires food. Food requires air supply. The Japanese have none. The Allies, meanwhile, move with confidence born from certainty. General William Slim's 14th Army has learned the lesson of Burma the hard way, that roads are traps and air is freedom. At Broadway and White City, jungle airstrips buzz with life. Dakotas land, unload, take off again within minutes. Bulldozers, flown in piece by piece, carve runways out of forest. Wounded men are lifted out. Fresh troops step in. Japanese patrols watch from the trees, stunned. One officer writes in his diary, "The enemy lives in the air, we live in the earth is killing us." On March 22nd, Nakajima's regiment finally makes contact, not with the main British force, but with its aftermath. Abandoned supply crates marked U.S. Army. Empty fuel drums. Fresh boot prints heading southwest. They are always hours behind, sometimes days. When they do encounter Allied troops, the fighting is brief and confusing. A sudden burst of fire. Mortars. Then silence. The British do not pursue. They do not hold the ground. They are already moving somewhere else. Nakajima realizes the horrifying truth. Even if he wins every skirmish, it will change nothing. You cannot kill an army that does not stop. By late March, the Japanese columns are starving. Rice is mixed with jungle roots. Ammunition is redistributed from the dead. Rifles are abandoned to lighten loads. Artillery is pushed into ravines because there are no horses left to pull it. Mutaguchi receives reports of entire battalions reduced to half strength without ever being attacked. One message reads simply, "Men dying of hunger, request permission to forage." Permission is meaningless. The jungle does not provide enough. As April approaches, the general finally understands the scale of the disaster. The enemy has not destroyed his army. They have rendered it irrelevant. An army that cannot move, cannot be supplied, cannot choose where to fight, is already defeated, even if its flags still fly. Mutaguchi stares at the latest situation map. Allied arrows flow west and south, converging toward Myitkyina, the key airfield, the hinge of northern Burma. His army is nowhere near it. And for the first time since the campaign began, Mutaguchi allows himself to think the unthinkable. Not how to advance, but how many of his men will ever walk out of the jungle alive. April 2nd, 1944. Near the Irrawaddy headwaters, northern Burma. Rain begins in the early hours, not as a storm but as a steady, soaking certainty. It turns the jungle floor into sucking mud and robs the last strength from men who have already given everything. Major Yamada Takeshi wakes to find 2 soldiers in his platoon dead beside him, not from wounds, but from exhaustion. They lay down during the night march and never stood up again. No one reports it. There is no point. Across northern Burma, Japanese formations are dissolving into smaller and smaller groups, bound together less by command than by shared hunger. Radios have gone silent to conserve batteries that no longer matter. Officers carry swords they have not drawn in weeks. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere. That morning, General Mutaguchi receives a message that finally forces him to confront reality. Myitkyina has fallen. The airfield, the objective the Japanese were supposed to block, the hinge of Allied logistics in northern Burma, is now firmly in Allied hands. American engineers are already expanding the runways. Fighters land, refuel, and take off within minutes. The campaign is over. Not officially. Not on paper. But in truth. Mutaguchi lowers the message and closes his eyes. Around him, staff officers wait in rigid silence. No one speaks first. To lose Myitkyina means the Allies now control the air over northern Burma completely. It means supply routes from India into China are reopening. It means every Japanese unit still in the jungle is now behind the war, not in front of it. How, one officer finally asks, his voice barely above a whisper, did they pass us? Mutaguchi opens his eyes. They did not pass us, he says quietly. We stood still. In the days that follow, Japanese commanders attempt to organize withdrawals in everything but name. Orders are couched in careful language. Redeploy shorten lines, seek favorable ground. But favorable ground no longer exists. At the regimental level, discipline begins to fracture. Men forage desperately, stripping villages bare, only to find nothing but empty huts and burned rice stores, destroyed by Allied columns weeks earlier. Some soldiers refuse to move. Others march until they collapse. Major Yamada encounters a group of British troops on April 6th. Gurkhas, moving light and fast, faces blackened, weapons slung casually. They exchange fire for less than 10 minutes. Mortar rounds fall. A machine gun opens up. Then the British withdraw. When Yamada pushes forward, there is nothing to take. No position. No supplies. Just footprints leading deeper into the jungle. He realizes with a chill that the enemy never intended to stop him. They intended to delay him until hunger finished the job. Overhead, Allied aircraft now fly lower. Some pilots wave. No one shoots. By mid-April, disease kills more Japanese soldiers than combat ever has in Burma. Dysentery, malaria, typhus, names written on casualty lists that no longer reach higher headquarters. Mutaguchi sends message after message to higher command, warning that entire divisions will be lost without immediate relief. The replies are vague, encouraging, detached from reality. Tokyo still believes in spirit over logistics. The jungle does not. On April 15th, Mutaguchi walks alone along a narrow path near his headquarters. The sword at his side catches on a vine, and for a moment he nearly stumbles. He steadies himself against a tree and breathes heavily. He is thinner now. So is everyone. In that moment, he understands what has truly happened. The Imperial Japanese Army has fought this campaign as if it were 1942, assuming the enemy must fight on the ground, along roads at fixed points. But the war has changed. The Allies have learned to turn air power into mobility, logistics into weapons, and jungle into concealment rather than obstacle. They did not need to defeat the Japanese army in battle. They only needed to make it irrelevant. Mutaguchi returns to headquarters and issues his final meaningful orders of the campaign: to save what men can be saved, to break units into smaller groups, to move east, away from Allied air dominance, through jungle that promises suffering but not annihilation. It is not victory. It is survival. As night falls, the sound of aircraft fills the sky once more, constant, confident, unstoppable. The war has moved on, and the jungle has chosen its side. For the Japanese army in Burma, the realization is complete. They were not overrun. They were left behind. April 25, 1944. Eastern hills of Burma. The jungle thins slightly as the land begins to rise, but relief never comes. The air is still heavy. The smell of rot follows every step. What remains of the Japanese formations no longer resemble divisions or regiments. They are columns in name only, strings of men separated by dozens of meters, sometimes by hours. Command structure has collapsed into whoever can still walk at the front. Private Tanaka is still alive. He no longer knows how many days he has marched. His uniform hangs loose. His rifle has no ammunition left, but he carries it anyway. Leaving it behind would mean admitting something he is not ready to admit. Around him, men chew leaves. Some boil belts and boots. Others stop speaking entirely. There are no more orders shouted. Voices are saved for warnings, leeches, snakes, sudden drops into ravines. Occasionally, Allied aircraft appear overhead, fighters this time, not transports. They circle, observe, and leave. There is no strafing. There is no need. General Mutaguchi travels with a reduced staff now, moving mostly at night. His radio was destroyed days earlier to prevent capture. Messages are carried by runners who rarely return. He has ceased issuing grand directives. Now he asks simple questions. How many are left? How many can still walk? The answers are never clear. At one halt, an officer reports that a battalion has failed to arrive. Delayed. Mutaguchi asks. The officer shakes his head. Gone, sir. No one asks how. In early May, the remnants of several units reach villages along the eastern approaches. They expect hostility. Instead, they find emptiness, people long gone, food stores destroyed months earlier by Allied patrols. The war has passed through here already. Some soldiers break discipline entirely. Small groups peel off into the jungle, choosing death on their own terms rather than another day of marching. Others continue out of pure momentum, legs moving because stopping would mean lying down. On May 10th, Mutaguchi reaches a ridge overlooking a river valley. For the first time in weeks, he sees open ground. Across it, Allied trucks move freely along a road the Japanese never touched. Dust rises behind them. Men laugh. Supplies flow forward, not backward. The sight is unbearable. This is what his army was meant to stop. Instead, it is watching from the edge of extinction. Later that night, under a rain-soaked poncho, Mutaguchi writes a brief entry in his notebook, not an official report, not something meant for Tokyo. We fought the jungle. The enemy learned to live above it. By the end of May 1944, the campaign is effectively finished. Japanese losses in Burma are staggering, not recorded in dramatic battles, but in miles marched, calories missing, diseases untreated. Entire units vanish from the rolls without ever surrendering, without ever being encircled in the traditional sense. They were not destroyed by fire. They were erased by movement. The Allies advance west and south, airfields leaping forward like stepping stones. Burma begins to open. Supply lines to China breathe again. The Japanese army that once dominated Southeast Asia now struggles simply to exist. For the survivors, the memory that endures is not of a final stand or heroic charge. It is the sound of aircraft passing overhead, always moving forward, and the knowledge that the war no longer needed them to end them. They had already been defeated the moment they were bypassed in the jungle.